It was virtually impossible to turn away from the coverage of 5 billionaires lost at sea on an ill-fated submersible last week. There was non-stop wall-to-wall coverage on television, in the papers, and online of the quest to find the 5 wealthy men lost at sea while hoping to travel to the Titanic wreckage. Learning that those men wouldn't be found alive was an undeniable tragedy for them and their families. But where is that sort of intense media frenzy when Black women and girls go missing? I'm Andrea Zopp. This is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Let's discuss. But up first is my one-on-one interview with Kelly Fair, founder and executive director of Polished Pebbles, right after this.
This week on In the Money, we will learn about balancing career choices and financial stability.
There is a lifestyle that you absolutely must have. You may have to redirect your steps.
Maybe you want to see a bigger salary bump. Things of that sort I think are important to know in advance when you're seeking out a new career.
In the Money airs on Thursday at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CAN-TV Plus app.
Just about all of us are familiar with the Cyndi Lauper classic, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. While today's first guest focuses some on what girls want, but also focuses a lot on what girls, especially Black and brown girls, need. What are the needs of our girls and how is she working to meet them? Well, here to share that and much more is Kelly Fair, founder and executive director of Polished Pebbles. Kelly, it's so nice to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you all through the pandemic.
Exactly.
So good to see you.
So let's talk a little bit about what is Polished Pebbles. For members of my audience who've not heard of it, tell us about the organization and what you do.
Absolutely. So I founded Polished Pebbles in 2009. Next year, that will make 15 years of Polishing Pebbles. And with our girls mentoring organization, we focus on girls being great communicators at home, great communicators at school, and great communicators for the future workplace. It's a mix of school day, after school programs. We got Saturday programs. Can't wait to hopefully talk a little bit more about our summer work study program and a global conference that happens virtually with girls from 4 different country.
Wow, I remember when you started the program and it was just a few girls, and Polished Pebbles has real meaning. So tell us, how'd you come up with the name?
Absolutely. So I am a girl who grew up on Essence magazine. When that mailman hit and the magazine hit the mail slot, I was the first one to grab it in my house. I loved everything about it, the editorials from Susan Taylor and the spirit in the front. But I wanted to be an Essence lady. They were beautiful, they had great clothes, great cars, family women like my mom, but most importantly, they had careers. And so for me with Polished Pebbles, it's that opportunity to expose girls to different careers. But again, Susan Taylor from Essence had a huge impact on me when I read the magazines, when she wrote her books. When she decided to leave Essence, she also wrote one of her last books, which was all about love. And of course, I bought it because she left the same time I left corporate America to start Polished Pebbles. Flipped through the pages, saw the chapter that was about the importance of relationships and how we impact one another. And a quote was there. It said, like pebbles in a bag, we all polish one another. And it just clicked for me. I was like, there you go. That's the name of the program.
Right. So it's about the love and protect and care and attention you give to these young women, and about polishing them and to help them become their best self.
And how we all polish one another. Right. You know, mentoring is not just top down, it's peer to peer, it's bottom up. So we're all getting in that bag of pebbles and getting rubbed up and polishing each other.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the impact on the number of girls that you're touching. Right. But tell us why you thought this was important and why there was a need for Polished Pebbles.
So for me, one thing is, I'm a girl who was mentored. And so for me, it's keeping the cycle of mentoring going on in our community. A mentor of mine who taught me much of what I know about girls and women's programming, Linda Shepard, passed away. And so I felt the need to keep the women who had been engaged in the program together and put it together for those different reasons, and connect us in that way. But it's important for us to keep mentoring going and create opportunities, so you can only be what you can see. see. And so keeping a whole network of women and men, because we love our male allies of different companies, community members, and then of course our paid staff that go out and work with the girls is incredibly important with us, because that way they continue the tradition that I was trained on, is when you can see a cross section of community members, especially in a city like Chicago, where everybody thinks that the violence has got everybody fed up, they're apathetic. No, there are community members who are looking for places and spaces to impact young people. So not only is my job to polish the pebbles and the girls, but also to create a space for community to have impact on closing the hope gap for girls.
Wow, it's so powerful. You know, it's such an enabler, not just the participants, but as you said, the community members and the people who are working with you. Yep. So you told me earlier, so I'd like to have you share, you're impacting a huge number of young women. So can you tell us a little bit about how many people in the programs, where the programs are, and particularly about your summer program?
Absolutely. So for us now with Polish Pebbles, we're serving about 50 schools and community sites for the full calendar year. That's about 1,500 girls. When it comes to our school day and after school programs, we focus on tween and teen girls. So we're at elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. We go as far north as Albany Park, as far south as Altgale Gardens, both east and west. We're also in the south suburbs, and then we grew this year to the western suburbs as well, and Broadview. And so we're serving all of those girls throughout the school year, and then we're starting our CEO Girl Summer. So we nixed out Hot Girl Summer. We're CEO girls here for the like summer. And so we have our Every Girl's a CEO Summer Work Study program, where they earn dollars to learn career readiness skills. Our Mommy and Me business program, that moms and daughters build bonds by building business plans together. So our girls and our families are both being impacted by our program, where they're learning skills to prep them for the future, for their time being as well. You know, we talked about the pandemic, and in the She Session, girls are leading many of the homes. That summer income becomes a critical part of their family's income as well. So we're prepping girls and pipelining them for the future workplace, but we're also impacting families where they are right now too.
Right. And you also told me you're creating a lot of jobs. How many people are you hiring this summer?
Absolutely. So this summer is one of our biggest summers ever. We'll be hiring about 200 girls. So my payroll grows pretty substantially over the summer, but we have virtual sites because, you know, as much as we wanted to get young people back in person, a lot of families are concerned and don't have the transportation, and we want our girls safe. And so virtual turns into a really great option. But I've got sites on the east side, sites on the west side, south. So we've got girls all over the summer who are learning how to prepare for their futures, but learning how to be stronger girls and stronger women. And we're helping to close those gaps for them where they're needed more support.
Wow, amazing. Well, I know your program has had real impact, but I also know some of the young women who've been through your program have accomplished some impressive things. You want to share with us some of the accomplishments of your alumni?
Absolutely. So I'm excited because I just feel like I got off a national tour of our Polish Pebbles alumni. So in the month of May, every weekend I was visiting a Pebble at another campus. Young lady who graduated from Harris-Stowe State University in St. Louis. One of our first junior mentees graduated from Howard Dental School the weekend after that. And then Ariel Tellis is one of our very first Polish Pebbles. She actually just finished. She was a Fulbright scholar, and now she finished at Yale Law School as well. Wow. So it was a wonderful tour. And then most importantly too, Andy, I got to replace myself. So not only are we investing in the next generation of school-age girls, those girls are now coming back as managers and helping to run our program. So Nia Lackland is our marketing programs manager, and she comes from one of the original Polish Pebbles families.
Wow, that's so important, and so important for you to recognize that, you know, for Polish Pebbles to stay, you've got to build that succession and that planning, and I think that's something sometimes in the Black community in particular we forget about. So, but you also told me you have an international program, so tell me a little bit about your global program.
So the beautiful thing about the pandemic, it forced you to pivot, but then it presented so many opportunities. So Every Girl's a CEO is my second book that I wrote. It's a career and success guide for girls of color. We had decided to do in 2019 in-person career conference in 2020. Pandemic hit, but the plans had to shift. we went virtual, and so unintentionally, people in other states said, can my niece, can my granddaughter participate? So we had girls in other parts of the U.S. Some of the work that I've done with some of your previous organizations and places, we had touch girls in other countries. We had a girl from India. So we said, let's capitalize on this. Went to some other partners we had worked with in South Africa. So the following years, we've had girls from South Africa, girls from Kenya and Jamaica all participate. So when girls are looking through the computer, and maybe on the south side of Chicago, but they're seeing a reflection of themselves and building a global network now.
And it's a global world, so how important. Kelly, I cannot believe it, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for the powerful work you are doing on behalf of our women and girls.
Thank you. Thank you for leading the way.
We'll be right back.
Greater Englewood consistently ranks as some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our city. This week on Change Agents, I'll be joined by incredible leaders who are looking to empower their communities and change that narrative. Join me this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, stream us on cantv.org, or download the CAN-TV Plus app. You do not want to miss this episode.
Many of us know the name of Gabby Petito, a young white woman whose disappearance and untimely death at the hands of her boyfriend made national news just days after she was reported missing. And those of us who've lived in Chicago for a spell know the names Drew and Stacy Peterson extremely well. He was the Bolingbrook police officer and she was his fourth wife, who vanished several years after his third wife was mysteriously found dead. So why then don't we know the names and stories of missing black girls like Diamond and Tianda Bradley? Why don't we know what happened to Rena Baker, the late sister of my friend Andre? Black girls and women account for 15% of all the girls and women in the United States, but of roughly 268,000 girls and women reported missing in 2020, a little more than a third of them were black. In 2021, nearly 20% of all missing persons were black women and girls. Why don't we know their names and their stories? Why aren't they front and center in the news? To help us understand are today's roundtable panelists. I'm thrilled to be joined by Jhmira Alexander, President and Executive Director, Public Narrative, Arionne Nettles, Director of Audio Journalism Programming at Northwestern University, and the incomparable Mary Mitchell, columnist, Chicago Sun-Times. Thank you for being with us. I'm really excited to have this conversation, this important conversation. So we've heard a lot in recent years about how black girls and women, their stories aren't covered. Is that true, or is that just us complaining? Mary?
No, that's true.
Yeah.
And I came into the business in 1991. In 2001, year 2000, this flight attendant named Tracy Todd disappeared. And her family had to literally beg and plead for the media to pay attention, that this wasn't just a case of somebody taking a vacation and not telling anyone. And then after Tracy Todd came Diamond and Tianda Bradley, and it was the same story. People having to go out and march and protest and say, we need you to pay attention to this story. And then became Daisy Hayes in 2018. Her daughter called me because her mother had disappeared and she felt that no one was paying attention to that story. Black women have been found in garages and alleys and garbage cans, and they're there because people do not pay attention to complaints that their loved one is missing.
Right.
And so I think that the same reason why it took so long for them to care about Tracy Todd and Diamond Bradley, the same reason it took them a long time to care about Daisy Hayes, and that is they don't value black women to the same degree that they value white women.
Right.
And that's a terrible thing to say, but that's the reason.
Ladies, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true, and we see it time and again as a constant reminder of that. Not investing in coverage for Black and brown, well, for Black women and Black girls is particularly offensive. And when we raise our voices to that, you know, it falls on deaf ears. What does that mean? Not just in journalism, but like as a system at large. You know, cases against Black women and girls aren't prosecuted to the same extent. So, you know, there's a complete upheaval that has to happen across the board, not just in journalism, but in the ways in which we invest in Black women and girls. And we are able to see ourselves in public space with a high regard for our lives.
Arionne, what about you? You agree with what you're hearing so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I am, though, encouraged by the fact that I think more of us are starting to speak up about it. And we're starting to have and see segments like this where people are saying this is normal, but it's not okay that this is normal. So even in, you know, popular TV shows or movies, there'll be a storyline about a Black girl going missing and people not really giving that case attention. I remember when I was a little girl, and a friend of the family, his mother went missing and nobody ever found her. We still don't know what happened to her. And it was just so normalized. But hopefully the kids in our family now will know that that's not okay and that, you know, have a little bit more of an understanding that that normalcy shouldn't be normal.
So let's dig a little bit deeper. How do you decide what gets covered? You know, whose decision is it? Who decides? How does that process happen so that, you know, when something comes up and you hear a news report or a story, how does it decide what gets covered?
You got to bug these people. You got to call. You got to call, and you got to complain, and you got to talk about it, and you got to get on radio, the stations that will let you on. But family members have to make some noise, because without it, the police aren't motivated to do anything. And I hate to say that, because you would think that the police would be caring about everybody. But if you're talking about someone missing in a Black community and you're talking about the crime that's going on in the Black community, they're going to put more emphasis on the crime that's going on than they will looking for this Black person. So you really have to make noise, and you have to really stay on the case, put up the posters, march if you have to, show up at the police department. That's what you have to do in order to bring attention to your missing person.
You say something really powerful in that the focus will be on the crime versus, you know, focusing on finding these Black women and girls, whereas we're not paying attention to the signal that it sends. It's this assumption, or we're supposed to deduce that if they're focusing on crime, then it's from a preventative standpoint. Not necessarily. And by not finding Black women and girls, you're sending the signal that there's no value to our lives.
Right, or sending a signal that all Black girls are runaways.
Yes.
Are all Black girls are left home because they just wanted to be gone, or that somehow or another they're responsible for their own missing person alert. You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. So I think that we have to spend more time holding our law enforcement accountable when they don't do their jobs, and families have to remember that it is on them really to make sure that they are holding the police department accountable.
And just adding to that, I think a lot of people don't maybe understand the hierarchy in a newsroom. And so, yes, you know, I think we are starting to see on a certain level more Black reporters in the newsroom, but reporters report to editors who then sometimes report to even higher editors. And so reporters alone can't often dictate what they cover. You may have a great idea to cover a story, and your editor may say that you can't cover it. And so it's really important, you know, kind of what Mary said, to think about calling into those places and letting them know what you care about. Or if a story is about that, click on that story, share that story, show through the analytics that we as a community care about that coverage, because at least the people higher up will see that, you know, if we can't drive it by compassion, you can see at least through analytics that yes, this is the type of content that we want our news providers to provide for us.
And use Facebook, use social media platforms to bring attention to these missing women.
Because they are doing, some outlets are doing their fair share of fielding the audience, like through focus groups and different audience engagement questions and things that they might even have on social. And instead of checking out of, because I think to some extent we've grown desensitized by what we want to see, but not seeing it and not necessarily knowing how to call for it. But those opportunities to check into like those inquiries from those outlets, that participation goes a long way. And I don't think we can really afford to look at history and say, well, nothing's going to change if I show up. No, we have to, we can't afford not to show up.
Right. I think you've all raised so many important points that I want to follow up on. So I want to circle back. I'm going to start with Arionne, something you said, which is really about the newsroom itself, like who's in there. In a 2016 study that was called Missing White Woman Syndrome, the author Zach Summers noted that numerous studies have concluded that whites are more likely than non-whites to appear in news stories as victims of crime. Right? We very rarely get even noticed as victims. So the question really that I want to ask is, do you think that the fact that there are not enough people of color in general, black people in particular, making the decisions as you go up that hierarchy, just like everywhere in the world, that there are not enough of us making those decisions to really push to say you will cover these stories? Is that really the point you were headed to?
Absolutely, you know, and so when we don't have enough people that look like us and value us in those positions, whether it's intentionally or not intentionally, they are not looking at stuff. And I think I'd use the example of trusting police reports as a sole source. That for years was the tradition, right? And now we know quite often that that cannot be something that will provide fair and accurate reporting. So if, for example, we have a missing black girl and the police have counted her in their system as a runaway, then she's not counted as missing. It's up to us to investigate that. But, you know, we need that approval oftentimes in most major newsrooms. And so you need editors that understand that are able to actually give the sign off and invest the resources. Really good investigative journalism, like we all know, requires a lot of time and a lot of investment of a newsroom's resources, and that is often not given if a story isn't seen as important.
Right. Right, Mary, I know you've been an advocate in the newsroom for stories about people of color and black people and women and girls. How hard has that been for you to really get people to just pivot and pay attention to these stories?
Well, you know, you spend the time, number one, you have to show the compassion for these families. And when they come to you, it's on you to listen and tell their stories. And I've for 3 decades, people have trusted me to at least bring attention in my little column in the newspaper, bring attention to the person that's missing. Because these families are suffering. If you don't have any answer to what happened to your loved one, that is traumatic, and they are suffering. And I think as being black in the newsroom gives me the opportunity to actually tell these stories. When other people are not listening, I listen. And that's what when you end up a black person in your newsroom, that's what you ought to be doing.
Right. I also think that the inequity in coverage has some broader implications, right? First of all, for black people generally, like we know, like we get it. We get that our stories aren't being told and as well as others. And so it kind of undercuts you, right? It's that thing where our kids, you know, don't feel, you have to fight to help them feel valued because they know when they look at the news, they're not going to see a compelling, compassionate story about somebody that looks like them. They're going to see a story where they're framed in a particular way. I think that is a really insidious issue that we have to be concerned about. I don't know, Jhmira, what do you think?
I absolutely. And that's where we see a lot of times, like, our young people, they have access to technology and they utilize social media in ways that are very degrading in some instances, but I think that media illiteracy comes from not seeing themselves portrayed as they know their lives to be. I've heard journalists, I've heard members of law enforcement say that, you know, they meet people sometimes around some of the most horrific instances or situations in their lives. And there are those who approach those moments with compassion and there are those who abuse those. Some some knowingly, some unbeknownst to them. In any event, I think there's a great measure of sensitivity, that training that needs to happen around the ways in which we navigate certain issues, particularly as the world is changing. It's a drastic difference between what baby boomers and Gen Zers find acceptable, you know? And so where do we find this ability to tell stories intergenerationally that offers respect and dignity to the subjects in question?
Right. So important. How you tell the
Absolutely.
story really matters. Now, when you work with students at Northwestern, how do you talk about this topic, and how do you frame it, and how do they feel about it?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about students today is that I think they're very aware, and I think they have a really strong desire to do this work better. So even students who are non-Black or from different communities, if they are covering a certain community, they have a desire to want to do it better. They are asking for trauma-informed reporting training so that if they're going to talk to someone who may be grieving, someone who has experienced certain things, they want to know, how do I not cause more harm? How do I take into account that these things are important, and how do I do it better? And so I think that then it's really up to us training them to kind of rise to that occasion and to do it better. And so I think conversations, real life examples, but I think that, to be very honest, they are leading us in a lot of ways. You know, going back to social media, we have a lot of student journalists who will push back and say, you know, I'm thinking about after the Uvalde shooting, I saw a lot of student journalists talk about a particular interview where a reporter went to the door of a teacher who was there that day and kind of, you know, did an interview. And it was really clear from that interview that the teacher was just really distraught. And the student said, well, what does this interview do? What does it add to this conversation? We already know that it was distraught. What does this do? Like, does this add, are we re-traumatizing this teacher for what? You know, and I think that really it is a situation where it's kind of a let the children lead you. And I think they have the desire, and then it's like teaming up with the experience that we have of, you know, people who have talked to people in these situations. How can we use that to create better practices overall that really help us? Because I think, you know, as a Black reporter, you kind of lean on the fact that if it's your community or a place you feel comfortable, you know how to talk to people, right?
Right.
You know, I did a story where I was trying to strictly interview mothers who had lost children to gun violence. And so if I'm talking to them, I'm like, yeah, you know, my cousin got killed this year, so I know how hard it was when we did, you know, X, Y, Z. And I'm trying to relate to people, but that's not going to be everybody's story. And so how can we create practices that create this compassion and create these things instead of the normal, we're just getting it done.
I mean, you all have made so many points. You know, one of the most important things that I want to make sure we leave with the audience is, Mary, where you started, which is advocacy, right? We have to be, right now at least, we have to push to have our stories told. And we have, as you guys both pointed out, lots of platforms, right? We have social media. We do not have to just march. We have lots of ways to put pressure on, and I think it makes a really big difference. And your commentary today has been so powerful and helpful. Thank you for this and joining me for this important conversation. I really appreciate it. Hope you'll come back.
Yes, thank you for having us.
We'll be back in a few minutes with my closing thoughts.
Hi, I'm Ryan G. I'm the host of Tweeners. This week on Tweeners, we'll be talking about food insecurities with a special guest, Mr. Christopher Watts.
To achieve health equity, workforce equity, public equity.
You can check my show out Fridays at 7 p.m. on CanTV 19, CanTV.org, and the new CanTV Plus out. I'm out.
When someone you care about goes missing, every second without them feels like an eternity. And my heart certainly goes out to anyone who is currently unsure of the whereabouts of someone they love. Providing more equitable coverage of the stories of missing Black and brown women will be an important step for the media to show and for us who consume media to know that their stories matter too. Good night, be well and well informed.